Imagine a skyscraper that looks solid from the street level. Steel glass lights. A monument to progress. But inside, the load-bearing columns are hollow. And every floor above is built on a debt obligation that was never meant to be paid back. This is China's modern economy. For 20 years, we were told a comforting myth that the United States is the reckless spender, that America is the empire addicted to credit cards, to cheap debt, to money printing, and that China is the disciplined industrialist, the saver, the builder, the patient lender to the world. But what if the world got this backwards? What if China's real economic engine, the thing that powered the growth miracle, the skyscrapers, the ghost cities, the high-speed rail, was not savings, but debt? And what if that debt is larger than America? Not per capita, not per household, not per government budget, but larger in total, once you include the debt that China deliberately hid from financial reports. Stay with this story, because if this is true, then the biggest economic collapse risk on Earth is not in the West. It sits behind the Great Firewall. The world misunderstands Chinese debt because they are looking at the wrong balance sheet. When analysts compare America versus China, they usually compare federal government debt versus central government debt. On that narrow metric, China looks safe. America is 34 trillion. China is only 14 trillion. But this comparison is meaningless. It's like comparing the debt of a magician while ignoring the other hand. Because the Chinese government doesn't run most of its borrowing through Beijing. It runs it through something far more opaque: local government financing vehicles, LGFVs. These are the shadow ministries of China's economy. Entities that look like companies, but are controlled by local Communist Party officials, designed to borrow money off the books. They borrow, they build, they spend, and the debt they create is not counted as government debt. It's counted as corporate debt. This is how China hid the real number. And the real number is terrifying. When you include LGFVs, state-owned enterprises, and non-performing bank loans, China's debt-to-GDP ratio exceeds that of the United States, Japan, and the EU combined. And here is the chilling part. Most economists outside China don't realize this, because the Chinese accounting structure was engineered to conceal systemic leverage. China's debt was never a bug. It was the operating system. The cornerstone of China's growth miracle was borrowed money. And that money is now compounding into a scale that even Beijing cannot control. Which leads to the question nobody dares to ask. What happens when the world's largest creditor is secretly the world's most leveraged debtor? It began in the late 1990s. China was transforming from a poor agrarian society into an industrial superpower. The government wanted fast growth, the kind that would shock the world. Real estate was the engine. But real estate needs credit. And Chinese banks were state-owned, which means credit didn't need to be justified by profit. Credit needed only one thing: political direction. So local governments created LGFVs, financing vehicles, to borrow money and build infrastructure. They turned farmland into urban zones, poured concrete, sold the land rights to developers, and used the money to repay the loans. It looked brilliant. It created GDP out of thin air. A self-feeding loop. 1. Borrow money. 2. Build something. 3. Revalue the land higher. 4. Say GDP increased. 5. Borrow more. The more China borrowed, the faster GDP grew. And for a while, this system worked like magic. But here is the structural flaw. China's economy became addicted to debt-led investment instead of productivity-led income. Every year, the system needed more leverage to produce the same GDP. Economists call this the diminishing marginal productivity of capital. But you don't need technical language to understand it. It's the same pattern of every empire before collapse. You need $2 of debt to produce $1 of growth, then $3, then $5. Debt grows faster than the economy until the entire system is debt. And the numbers today are staggering. China has more debt than the United States, not because its government is careless, but because every level of the Chinese state is a borrower. Provincial debt, city debt, county debt, state enterprise debt, shadow banking debt, property developer debt. Evergrande was not a scandal. It was a symptom. Country Garden was not an accident. It was a signal. The property sector wasn't 20% of Chinese GDP. It was closer to 30% when measured honestly. This is larger than Spain before 2008, larger than Japan before 1990. And here is the darkest truth. Most of the debt is not backed by productive assets. A factory that produces exports can eventually repay a loan. A ghost city cannot. So China built tens of millions of empty apartments because the empty apartments could be used as collateral to issue more loans. The structure was not sustainable. It was a capital multiplier illusion. And now those illusions are showing cracks. Real estate prices are collapsing in Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities. Land sales, the core revenue source of local governments, are plunging. Banks are rolling over loans because if they force repayment, the borrowers default and the entire region collapses. China is not refinancing debt because it is healthy. China is refinancing debt because default is politically impossible. The Communist Party cannot allow mass unemployment and mass household wealth destruction because political legitimacy in modern China comes from a promise. We manage the economy better than the West. So the debt cannot default. It can only be rolled forward again and again into a future that never arrives, which means something chilling. China's debt is not a delay of crisis. It is the mechanism spreading the crisis quietly across time, so society does not see the shock in 1 year, but in every year. It is economic necrosis, not cardiac arrest. There is no Lehman moment. The collapse is not cinematic. It is geological. The West collapses fast. China collapses slow. And slow collapse is more dangerous because it hides the problem inside the social fabric. This is not a bubble. This is a metastasis. The real twist is this. China's debt problem is bigger than America's, not because the number is larger. It's because China has no mechanism to clear it. America can default, restructure, devalue, inflate, let banks fail, let markets crash, because the system is decentralized. Pain is distributed through markets. But China cannot allow pain. Pain is political. If China allows default, trust evaporates. If trust evaporates, the social contract breaks. If the social contract breaks, the state loses the mandate of heaven. So China must preserve the illusion at all costs that every loan will be repaid, which creates a paradox unlike any in modern finance. China cannot fix the debt because the debt is what holds the system together. The loans are not just liabilities. They are the connective tissue of the economy. Debt is the glue. Debt is the propaganda. Debt is the silent promise that tomorrow will be bigger than today. So China must keep borrowing to avoid collapse, even though borrowing is what guarantees collapse. This is not a bubble. This is a structure designed to avoid panic by sacrificing truth. So when people ask, will China collapse like the United States in 2008? They are asking the wrong question. America collapses in one moment, in one shocking, spectacular event. China collapses like a glacier, silently, slowly, invisibly, until one day the support structure is gone. The danger is not a crash. The danger is the absence of crash. Debt that cannot fail becomes debt that cannot heal. And here is the final unsettling realization. We once believed China would replace America as the world's financial superpower, that the world's future would be written in Mandarin, not in English. But that dream was built on loans that cannot be repaid, and buildings that cannot be lived in, and growth that was never organic. The world's biggest creditor is also the world's most fragile debtor. And the world's strongest economic engine was built not on savings, but on leverage. In the end, China did not discover a new model. China discovered the oldest one. You can buy growth with debt, but you must repay it with time. And time is the one resource China is now running out of. Not because the clock is moving fast, but because the future is not expanding anymore. It is shrinking.